Ah, yes, the infamous pot archetype. Famous for its one only card, which was used in numerous times throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters and GX, and appeared in Arc 5 as a reference card. So yeah, the card was used by an absurd amount of duelists, so I'm not even going to uh, try to figure out who was the first one to use it, because the list just goes on and on. So yeah, let's get started with this tech archetype, I should say, and start off with their first card, and probably the most famous card, Pot of Greed. And brace yourself, this card has one of the most complex effects in the game. Draw 2 cards. That's it, that's the whole effect. Yeah, jokey jokes aside, this is actually the card with the shortest effect in the game, and it's very good. Drawing 2 cards with no drawbacks or conditions whatsoever is such an absurdly good effect, which is the reason why this card is banned to this day, and was banned since the ban list had become a thing, which was around 2004, I believe. So yeah, Pot of Greed ain't coming back, and I'm sure that this card will not be getting an errata, so yeah, they wanna keep it like that for tradition, I wanna say. But yeah, this card has spawned numerous cards which support the Pot of Greed playstyle, or other pots which do various shenanigans. So let's cover the first 2 monsters, one of the only 3 monsters of this archetype which support the Pot of Greed playstyle. First of which is Spirit of the Pot of Greed, which is a level 1 fairy with 100 attack and defense, and basically allows you to draw an additional card if you activate Pot of Greed. Needless to say, without Pot of Greed it's completely useless, but even if the Pot of Greed was illegal, I wouldn't see this being ran in anything, since well, it's a frail level 1 fairy. I mean, you can use it temporarily if you have 3 pots of greed in your hand and then link it away or something into a Linkuribo or something. But you're really stretching it by using it like that. And same can generally be said about Avatar of the Pot, which is a level 3 rock, which allows you to send 1 pot of greed from your hand to the graveyard in order to draw 3 cards. Which is, again, you could say that this dodges any kind of spell negation effect, since this is technically a monster effect that is going off. But yeah, that's pretty much that's pretty much it. A very situational monster effect. But hey, it's a level 3 Earth Rock monster, meaning you can use it for Gorgonic Guardian if you ever so feel like it. So yeah. The other card, which was given birth from Pot of Greed's legacy, is Jar of Greed. Yeah, jars are essentially not the jars, the archetype, like Morphing Jar 2, and all that. Those archetypes are called pods, P-O-Ds, in the Japanese naming. So this one isn't. This is actually a jar on the English and the Japanese. But anyway, there are 2 jar cards, this one being Jar of Greed. This allows you to draw 1 card. So basically, they're the weaker version of the Pot of Greed. But yeah, this card also has the support of Jar Turtle, which is a level 4 water a reptile monster with 200 attack and 2100 defense. And each time Jar of Greed is activated, it allows you to draw an additional card. So yeah, this was basically the way to circumvent the weaker version, that is the Jar of Greed, from being, well, weaker. But yeah, Jar of Greed allows you to draw 1 card, which is a very good effect, mind you. That is which is the absolute same effect for Upstart Goblin, which is limited to this day. But this one is unlimited because it's very slow. It's a trap card, so yeah. Neither Jar Turtle nor Jar of Greed see play. Jar of Avarice we'll get to later. Anyway, now let's go on to check out some other pots in the spell department before we go on to some of the spell cards which support the Pot of Greed playstyle. First of which we have Pot of Avarice. This one allows you to target 5 monsters in your graveyard, shuffle all 5 into the deck, and then draw 2 cards. This is also a very powerful card, which was banned for quite some time until very recently it became limited and then unlimited in the last ban list. So yeah, we got Pot of Avarice back, and I'm sure some decks are going to get some mileage out of this, because this type of recovery is just that good. You can recycle any 5 monsters from your graveyard and then draw 2 cards, including extra deck monsters, so you essentially go +2 without getting some old stuff back from the from your graveyard back into your deck. So yeah, great card, and it should always be an option for you deck builders out there. Next up we have Pot of Duality. Excavate the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 of them to the hand, also after that shuffle the rest back into your deck, and you can only activate 1 of these per turn, and you cannot special summon the turn you activate this effect. Yeah, this is basically also a 3-off staple, or maybe even a 2-off staple, since it limits you to activating 1 of these per turn. This is essentially +1 in its purest form, and is frequently ran in Exodia decks, so yeah, it's a great card to consider having. Next up we have Pot of Dichotomy. At the start of your main phase 1, target 3 monsters with different types in your graveyard, shuffle all 3 into the deck, then draw 2 cards. You cannot conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this effect. Yeah, this is not that hard of a staple since Pot of Avarice came back, although I doubt that this will see any more play since Pot of Avarice has returned to the game. But yeah, this was a hard staple in massive amounts of decks which rely on having all the other monsters with different types in their deck, which yeah, usually are monsters which share an attribute but don't share the same type. I'm not sure quite. Ice barriers are one of them, so yeah, ice barriers could see some mileage out of this thing. But yeah, Pot of Avarice is back, so there's no reason to go back to this thing, unless you're very heavily reliant on this effect. Unless, yeah, then it doesn't hurt, I guess. Next up we have Pot of Benevolence. Select 2 cards from the graveyards and shuffle them into their owner's deck. After activation, remove this card from play instead of sending it to the graveyard. You can only activate 1 of these per turn. Yeah, there are... this is just a spell version of Transmigration Prophecy, so I guess it works, although I'm very curious to the fact why the hell do we need to remove this card from play, aka banish it after using its effects. So yeah, again, I don't see any need for you to run this since Pot of Avarice came back, and there's a much better trap card which I spoiled earlier that helps out with that. So yeah. Next up we have the quick play Pot of Acquisitiveness. Target 3 banished monsters, shuffle all 3 into the deck, then draw 1 card. You can only activate 1 Pot of Acquisitiveness per turn. Essentially a better slash neutral version of Burial from a different dimension, since Burial of a Different Dimension just returns the cards to the graveyard, so you can use their graveyard effects once again. However, this one brings them back into the deck, so you can use them back if you use them again during the duel, and you get a nice +1 on top of that. I'd say if your deck is focused on banishing stuff a lot, then I'd suggest running 2 Burials and 2 of Acquisitiveness, so you have the perfect balance of both worlds. Next up we have Pot of Riches. Shuffle 3 Pendulum monsters into the deck from your graveyard and/or face up from the extra deck, then draw 2 cards. You can only activate 1 of these per turn, and you cannot special summon the turn you activate this effect except by Pendulum Summon. This is basically a godsend for all Pendulum decks, which yeah, since heavy Pendulum spam decks don't usually see their monsters in the graveyard, this is basically Pot of Avarice for the Pendulum spam decks, and yeah, it's usually a 3-off or even 2-off staple if you find 3 to be cloggy in the deck. So yeah, great card. Alright, now we move on to some other more extravagant pots, if I do say so myself. First of which we have Pot of Desires. Banish 10 cards from the top of your deck face down, then draw 2 cards, and you can only activate one of Pot of Desires per turn. So yeah, this card is actually ran at 3 copies in a vast amount of decks because of the effect that you can draw 2 cards. However, I do not find this card appealing at all since, well, you're banishing 10 cards from the top of your deck. So basically, if you play 3 of these, you can basically deck yourself out if you draw all 3 of them. So yeah, which is usually the case why 1 is usually activated during the duel and not anymore. So yeah, but all of those players who play 60 card decks like me, I can't help myself but play a 60 card deck. I'm just that spoiled, I should say. Usually have much more better times with this since most of their deck is going to remain intact even if they activate this. So yeah, that's basically Pot of Desires, and yeah, the Necrophase decks got a sudden surge of popularity after this card got released, since they basically they need as many banished cards as they can get, and Sandalphon players also got some mileage out of this, so yeah, great card. However, if Pot of Desires isn't quite your cup of tea, then you can try out the Pot of Extravagance. At the start of your main phase 1, banish 3 or 6 random face down cards from your extra deck face down, then draw 1 card for every 3 cards banished. For the rest of this turn after this card resolves, you cannot draw any cards by card effects. So yeah, this is another card which sees frequent plays, I believe even more so than Pot of Desires, because this is mainly used in decks which do not usually go into their extra deck all that often, so they can use it for draw engines. So yeah, you draw 2 cards max off of this, which is again acceptable and kind of understandable. And if you can always draw, if you run 3 of them, you can draw 5 cards max off of this thing, because you can draw 2 out of 1 and 4 out of 2, and then you're going to have 3 cards left for only 1 draw. So yeah, unless you find some way to return up to 3 extra deck monsters back into the extra deck. So yeah. Okay, so that was the last of the exclusive pots. Well, actually no, we have one more. That being Pot of Generosity. Yeah, this card is so bad I forgot that it even existed. All it does is allow you to return 2 cards from your hand to your deck and then shuffle it. Yeah, unless you're saving yourself from a deck out, I see absolutely no use for this, which is one of the reasons why this card is the worst card of all time. Moving on, now we move on to the cards which support the Pot of Greed playstyle, first of which we have Chaos Greed. You can only activate this card if 4 or more of your cards are banished, and there are no cards in your graveyard. Draw 2 cards from your deck. Yeah, this basically is a excellent draw card for Macrocosmos decks, since basically those decks which focus on turboing out Macrocosmos as fast as possible usually don't have anything in the graveyard. So this is basically a regular Pot of Greed for them. So yeah, it's a great card, but for very specific decks. Next up we have Greed Grotto, a quick play spell. Activate only if you destroyed a face-up Synchro monster controlled by your opponent this turn, and either by battle or a card effect. Draw 2 cards. Yeah, you could pretty much deduce that this saw some very sparse play during the Synchro era, where Synchro monsters were more heavily rampant than ever. So you could use this in order to get some pluses out of destroying the opponent's Synchro monster, but nowadays, and even then, this was barely worth running. So yeah, I'd say ignore this one. Next up we have Moray of Greed. Reshuffle 2 water monsters from your hand into the deck, then draw 3 cards. An excellent tech option for all water decks, since you're basically getting rid of the monsters which you don't need at the moment back into your deck and drawing 2 more cards to replace them, and an additional one at that. So basically it's an even 0. So yeah, all of you water deck enthusiasts there, you should run 3 of these. Next up we have Shard of Greed, a continuous spell. Each time you draw a card for your normal draw in your draw phase, place 1 greed counter on this card. You can send this card with 2 or more greed counters to the graveyard, draw 2 cards. It's fine. It saw some niche competitive play in Exodia variants, and that's about it. Its best usage is that you have to pair up multiples in order to get multiple worth of draw during your second turn after you've activated it. But yeah, if you feel like it, you can run it. But otherwise, there are better draw cards out there. Oh, next up we have a very interesting one. We have Jar Robber, quick play once again. You can only activate this card when a Pot of Greed is activated, negate the effect of the Pot of Greed, and draw 1 card from your deck. I can assure you that if Pot of Greed was legal, then everyone would run at least one of these, because having the option to negate a very specific card, which is very famous and is probably going to be ran in every single deck if it was legal, is so euphoric that the people would just want to do it as much as possible to get those jitters and jiggles out of it. So yeah, if you ever find someone to play casually with a Pot of Greed in their deck, then I'd absolutely advise running this. Next up we have some trap cards, the last 3 trap cards I should say. First of which we have the Gift of Greed. Your opponent draws 2 cards. Yeah, unless you manage to find some way for your opponent to activate this via something like giving it to your opponent via gift exchange or exchange, and activate it via bait doll. I don't see the reason why you would want to run it, but yeah, this card also has some uses in deck out decks if you wanna think about that. So yeah, it's not entirely useless, you could say, but it's certainly not the best either. Next up we have Reckless Greed. Draw 2 cards and skip your next 2 draw phases. Yeah, skipping draw phases is one of the harshest conditions for to fulfill, since giving up just 1 draw phase can cost you the game, which is the reason why Time Seal is still banned to this day. But yeah, if you pair up multiples, like activate all 3 on the same turn, then you can basically draw 6 cards and then skip 2 of your next draw phases, which actually becomes a pretty versatile effect. So yeah, run by preference. And the last card is the card I spoiled earlier, which is Jar of Avarice, a weaker version potentially of the Pot of Avarice. It allows you to target any 5 cards in your graveyard except the Jar of Avarice, shuffle all 5 into the deck, and instead of drawing 2 cards you draw 1 card, and you can only activate 1 Jar of Avarice per turn. Yeah, this saw some very nice competitive play, since you can basically recycle absolutely anything and then get a plus out of it, and you can also use it at the end of the opponent's turn, so you can basically get 2 cards instead of 1 at the beginning of the turn. So yeah, great card overall, and yeah, definitely worth running alongside even Pot of Avarice, which is neat. So yeah, now time for the grading scale. It should come to no surprise that I should give everything 1 out of 3 except consistency and versatility, because the sheer amount of these cards and the amount of competitive relevance and the level of fame that Pot of Greed managed to gather is just simply mind-blowing. So yeah, drawing any number of cards well, if it is even 1 or 2, can really turn the tide of the game around, which is why I feel it's obligated that I need to give this tech archetype a consistency at 2 out of 3 and the versatility 2 out of 3. So yeah, that was the pot archetype. I'm really happy that I've managed to do this archetype eventually on the show. I have no idea why didn't I think of this sooner in order to do that archetype, but yeah, only 5 more archetypes remain. I think I need to count 1, 2, 3, 4 archetypes actually before we go into the collection pack 2020 archetypes. So yeah, it'll be fun. But anyway, that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more reviews, walkthroughs, and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. And as usual, I'll upload the next vid whenever I can. See you all. Have a good day and peace.